On today's episode of the DeRaud Messinger Show, we're breaking down what we saw in our instant reaction to Texas versus Baylor. Longhorns fans, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. It's greatly appreciated. And of course, follow us along at HornSports.com for all the latest. And we are cranking out stuff. And of course, still, it's always free. Name a better country to live in where you get some free Longhorn news. It's just outstanding. But Dylan, with all that being said, I was in Waco last night covering the Texas versus Baylor game. I can confirm that I am indeed one tired fellow after getting back in Austin around 2 a.m. and cranking out the articles and everything that needed to be done. Probably going to bed around 4. So we got good energy. With that said, for what I'm dealing with, Dylan, Texas not only won at Baylor, but I think surpassed our expectations as well. Of course, there were some drawbacks, which we'll get to in the deflated balls section of this video. But Dylan, what's your overall takeaway so far?
Well, I was just to give some context, Devon. I know you were working hard last night. I saw your text from 2 a.m. when I'm waking up, at like 7 a.m. So Devon's working really hard out here. But I was watching the recording this morning, and they did kind of the drone shot or like above, and they were showing all the Baylor fans kind of running. There was a thought in my mind that was like, someone's gonna get trampled doing that. What's it called where they all rush the field
The
and
the
like get
Baylor
in line?
line. Well, did you
Yeah.
did you see Aranda got almost trampled in that? Did you see that?
Well, there were some kids that actually got trampled, and I'm like, there is somebody that is going to get trampled, and there was just a mass group just falling on their face. But what I'm saying here, Devin, is it kind of happened to Baylor's football team in this one too, just with how dominant Texas's defense was. Sawyer Robertson, Devin, he obviously he was banged up. You could tell just given his ankle, there were some plays that it felt like he could not make, especially mobility wise. And he actually had some like decent shots in this game to his receivers. And we'll talk about the secondary for Texas here probably in a bit. I know you highlighted them earlier before we were on the call, but this defensive line and just the linebacking core of Texas was really the impressive part. And I don't want to rattle off a hot take here, Devin. Now, I'd love your thoughts, but I thought this was the best win Texas has had this season. Like, I just thought with just the question marks we had about this team's toughness, we know they beat Alabama and they've taken care of business against Wyoming and against Rice, but it really was how are they going to handle a rivalry matchup in the Big 12 on the road, sold out crowd at night, right? And they handled it as perfectly as they should, right? Baylor didn't really feel like they matched up well. I mean, you could say the first two drives or like the first drive for Texas at the beginning of the game, you're kind of like, uh-oh, like what's going on here? And then boom, you see Brooks break right after a great block by tight end Gunnar Helm on a pulling block to set the edge for a 40-yard touchdown, putting Texas up 7-0. And then you're seeing on the other side of the ball with just Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, who had a great game, also being a lead blocker on a touchdown run for Brooks later in the game too. So he's been all over the place. I think he had two
Two
sacks too, Devin.
sacks.
So yeah, they were just flying all around. I really want to highlight the linebacking group, especially of Jalen Ford, David Gabenda, and Anthony Hill, who are the top three tacklers on the team. I think Jalen Ford had eight total tackles and an interception in the end zone. So just all around, at least when I say all around, just the front seven for Texas defensively just looked great out there. Really, really impressed me. And it just also showed the depth that Texas has defensively, because you saw Jet Bush getting in on some action, Devin. There was two other players that I wanted to highlight as well. I think it was Maurice Blackwell. He had a great play in the end zone, cutting off a play-action play by Robertson where he was going to try to go to the running back, and Blackwell actually picked him up and forced him to have to throw it out of bounds. Or I think Taft got in on the play and broke it up. So very, very impressive just by this front seven of Texas. And that was my biggest takeaway from that game.
Did Maurice Blackwell? I didn't even notice that because I know he had been injured and I know he was practicing earlier. So if you caught that, good on you because
And it was Vernon Broughton, who also had a sack, another linebacker that looked great out there. He was blowing up some plays, and like I said, had a sack as well. So
yeah,
linebacking group in general
that
looked
front. Yeah, I mean that was my premier game ball. I just put the Texas front on defense, specifically the front seven, because you do want to crop it in so that Jalen Ford gets a little bit of that recognition for that end zone interception. He beat himself up in the post-game press conference, jokingly saying that he probably wish he could have taken a knee in the end zone instead of trying to take it out a little bit. And of course, not the greatest start field position wise, but any takeaway is a good takeaway, especially when Baylor is in the red zone. So yeah, 5 sacks, Dylan, on the night for the Longhorns. The team only allowed Baylor to rush for 60 yards. And I was over here on my computer, Dylan, looking at some stats. And this one is a fun one for you guys. The leading rusher for Baylor was their backup quarterback, their third-string quarterback, R.J. Martinez, who got some playing time late. And it was garbage time at that point in the game. I mean, this was a dominant effort from the defense. And Dylan's talked about it in some other videos, and I've agreed too, but I've also been like, I need some more data points before I can, go gung-ho on this defense. But the defense has been winning games by itself. Deflated ball for me, Dylan, was the Texas punt return, and I only mention that now and kind of skipping ahead because the defense said, okay, like, you guys did cost us points here, but we're not going to give up 7. We're going to force Baylor to kick 2 field goals when it could have been a much bigger point swing. The other game balls, Dylan, Jatavian Sanders, got to mention him. 5 catches for 110 yards, one-hander, a little reminiscent of the Denton Ryan days for the 6'5" tight end. And then Jonathan Brooks, yet again a big performance against Wyoming in which he rushed for 164 yards. But then against Baylor, Dylan, let's see, he had 18 carries, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And, back to his days at Hallettsville, he's probably asking Sark, why aren't you giving me 40 carries right now? I got a little more left in the tank. But those two had great performances. Of course, Quinn Ewers even showed off his wheels a little bit. And Dylan, I talked about it in the preseason. He's got to be hitting that 63% accuracy mark in order to get in positions where he needs to be. And Quinn was on fire against Baylor. Yet again, nothing crazy in terms of like touchdown production, but he was most notably having some of those Drew Brees just air on the football, let him go get it sort of plays. Of course, Quinn, I would say, has more arm strength than Brees, but Brees is the king of accuracy. But Quinn let Jonte Cook get under a ball on third, I believe in 15, that set up Texas for a scoring drive. Just a good night for Quinn too. You got to give him his due.
Did you hear the history that he made, or one of the stats that he has?
What happened?
It was the broadcast talking about it. He has 225 straight completions without an interception. That's second most in school history, behind Ellinger, who has 308. So Ewers is doing very well. We talked about his turnover issues right from last year, and he's fixed them so far early on in this season. So it's very impressive.
Yeah, it's been an impressive start for Quinn, staying out of that turnover column. I believe the ratio right now for him, I'd have to check it, but I believe it's 8 touchdown passes to 0 interceptions. Yet again, expert analysis going on. 9 touchdowns. I knew I was off. 9 touchdowns. Got to give him his due, the accurate number there. 9-0. It looked good. Yet again, I mean, you can't really complain. I mean, there's been some other games where he's been off, but, for the most part, he did what he should have, put the position of the team in, as well as they could have to win this game. And then Dylan, the other deflated ball I had was the Texas secondary. Oh, I
had them as well.
That was rough to watch. Now I know some Longhorns fans will, argue about Michael Taft seeing the playing field, Dylan, but of course he came on as a walk-on, but he was a preferred walk-on, and you know what preferred walk-on means is that you're getting a scholarship in year 2. So he is a scholarship athlete. He is not just some guy they found off the street. And usually he's pretty decent for Texas. He made one bad play on a defensive pass interference, and then later in the game he stepped up, and I saw him making some tackles around the line of scrimmage. So he did, make up for that. Jaron Thompson also got turned around on one, which was pretty bad. Yeah. And I believe Monterey Baldwin beat the Texas secondary. So not the greatest showing for them when every other unit, Dylan, seemingly had themselves a day. Yeah. And the more concerning thing to note that I put in my notes is, Sawyer Robertson, unfortunately for Texas, is not going to be the greatest quarterback they face this year. And I will bet my rent money on that. I mean, he's got some time to develop, and yet again, only threw 1 interception, which, I mean, for Baylor fans, maybe that's a plus, but of course they want more from that position. But still, I mean, just looking forward, Dylan, next week against Kansas, Daniels has been a great quarterback. The following week against Oklahoma, we know what Dylan Gabriel is capable of. Not the
Yeah.
greatest of performances leading up to those. What do you feel?
I I mostly, when we're talking about kind of the secondary, I worry most with just the speed outside that Baylor had with the receivers. Monterey Baldwin just cooked Watts on a 55-yard touchdown, or I think near touchdown catch. So it was one of those days for them. You kind of saw just the difference making that they can create with that speed that Baylor had. The other part is you got to have a quarterback that gets them the ball. So they did have quite a bit of talent there, just speed wise for Baylor. And you worry about that in future matchups like that we're talking about, because you saw it with those deep balls from Alabama to, I believe, Isaiah Bond. So I think that is a weakness to kind of look at, see if they get better on in terms of like just their help on coverage against teams that are going to have that speed outside. And you're going to see that with Kansas and see that with Oklahoma, with quarterbacks that can get them the ball pretty consistently. So that is something to be concerned about. And we'll see kind of how they adjust, whether that's bringing less linebackers and using them more in a kind of the zone packages, right? Like especially utilizing Jalen Ford's ability to like read the eyes of the quarterback. You saw that in the interception where he was playing his zone, but always keeping his eyes on where Robertson was, and just kind of feeling the receiver, and he was able to get back and get the interception. So you could see that in just the way that he's able to kind of clog up the middle, make it a little bit more dangerous for those crossing routes for the opponent to kind of go after, with just how good Ford is in coverage. But yeah, like I was talking about, that speed, just receivers wise, if they go up against a talented receiver, I'm curious to see how they kind of do against that, because that is one thing that we necessarily haven't totally seen yet, or at least the tandem between the quarterback and the receiver. So it's something to look for. You might not see it in the Big 12 right now. This could be a future issue. I don't want to talk about the college football playoff or something, Devin, but if that were to happen, that would be where a lot of those concerns are, because the quarterback talent is going to be a lot different at that point. So that is something to look at, and I think this game kind of brought that to a lot of our attention.
Yeah, that's fair. Of course, bigger picture, we'll wait till we get closer to a bigger
I love
picture.
doing that because you get so
Yeah.
squirmish whenever
Oh,
I bring that
gosh.
up. So it's so good.
I mean, just the fact that I believe McCaffrey for Rice gave Texas secondary some problems at receiver.
Yeah.
Wyoming was taking advantage of some problems in Texas secondary. Baylor did so a few times, not too many times. There were only a few breakdowns, but the breakdowns that happened were pretty sizable, as Dylan was saying. And then yet again, just to harp on a little bit, the other issue was special teams, of course. A muff punt by Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington, two of the guys that you'd assume have the hands to catch it. I know
Yeah.
it was a little windy. I think some people are overblowing how windy it was at McLean. The press box window was open. I was front row, so I was getting some of that, Dylan, but I don't
Mm.
know if it was enough to say it warranted the drops. But Jeff Banks, I'm sure we'll be having the guys have a fun practice this week. But Dylan, I also saw a lot of Baylor fans, of course, were hyped and everything, but let me tell you, the Longhorn faithful, maybe 25% of that stadium was Texas fans. I heard some Texas fight chants. I saw a lot of black wearing by Baylor. I saw someone on Twitter saying that they were dressed for a funeral. Well, Dylan,
Mm.
it might have been a
Mm.
Baylor funeral last night.
I wanted to add to that point because there was a lot of times. I think it was Matt Jones. That was the linebacker for Baylor. That was
Hmm.
in on a few plays. I believe he had 2 sacks on Ewers. There was a lot of chirping. I think it was
Are you
also
talking
Jenkins, one of the
about what I'm
corner.
thinking here?
Just
Yeah.
about Baylor. I find it funny that they're down 28-6 and they're still talking. And when I say that, I mean it more as like this was a physical game. Baylor always felt like they were going to try to stay in it, right? Like their mentality didn't necessarily waver. Like they were just going to give up and pack it up and head out of the stadium, right? So Texas had to continue to kind of play to where they're at talent wise and couldn't make any mistakes during this game, which they didn't. So we're able to talk about it this way. But again, I thought that was the impressive part because as you would see on the broadcast, and I'm sure you could see in the game, there was definitely a lot of talking coming from Baylor, a little bit extra after the tackles. So that was just stuff to kind of look at. And so again, this is a different Texas team than last year and in the past, just mentally in the way that they come into these games and they stay focused during the big moments and they come out on top. So that's another big takeaway here against Baylor.
Yeah, I think that was the big win, was that there were some scenarios in cases of previous games where they just would stall out And when they needed some extra momentum, Dylan, they would have to wait for another quarter in order to get it. Against Baylor, it seemed like when Texas needed it, they'll need a little extra push. They got it. Like I said, there's some big completions to guys like J.T. Sanders and Jonte Cook, which obviously helped, spur the movement there. But also, of course, the fourth quarter, one of the gripes is you want to see them step on the throats a little bit earlier so you can get all the backups in. Depth is such an important part of college football, and snaps are hard to come by in games, Dylan. It's funny how that works. And, of course, not the most snaps for everybody, but the defense pretty much was in there backups-wise entire fourth quarter. Malik Murphy, I believe, came in around the 7-minute mark of the game. Like, as long as you're getting your backups in there at some point, of course, the end result is good. And Dylan, speaking of some chirping, I don't know if you saw Jonathan Brooks. He was getting chirped at, and he just pointed to the scoreboard. That was funny to me. Yeah. So he had himself a night, and, go point for the scoreboard when you're up, let's see.
And that's the biggest thing as a player. When you're up like that, and not to, you get into a shoving match or draw some personal fouls, you should always in your mind be like, okay, I'm going to point the scoreboard thing when I'm up by 20 points. Like, that means they're prepared. They already know that they got to go to that.
And you're not going to get a foul or a flag for that.
Exactly.
So it's
the
the
refs are just
going
to laugh because they're also laughing that they're still talking crap at that point, right? So
exactly. Now, what do you guys think about the Texas versus Baylor game? Of course, a big win for the Longhorns. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out our stuff at HornSports.com. And as always, have a great rest of your day.